Hi, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Jennifer Loves Books and welcome to my March wrap up. So as of today we are a few days into March and I have read a few books. First of all, I actually have two books to talk about that I finished at the end of February. I was slightly premature in concluding my February wrap up. I was not expecting to finish any more books and then I read two more books. So the first of those was The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy. This is a thriller with a bit of a difference. It's about a father-son relationship. We have a retired detective involved trying to solve some things. It's difficult to talk about, and I feel like you're best going into this knowing very little. So I'm not going to say much more actually. It's quite intriguing, it's quite pacey, particularly the second half. I found it quite page turning. It went some places I wasn't expecting. There was one point in the book when I did gasp out loud. And it's got quite a lot of heart as well. This isn't a very good review because I don't want to give anything away. I really think you're best off going into this knowing very little and don't look at reviews online would be my suggestion. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was doing something different. So I think if you like thrillers, it has I'd say it sort of has the pace of a thriller. But there's lots of interesting stuff going on in here. I would recommend. Then I read My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. So I read this for my book club at the library. This is probably not a book I would have picked up for myself. And I will say that I liked this more than I was expecting to, but I still didn't like it very much. So what's it about? It's about Lucy Barton. She's in hospital over a 9-day period in New York, and her mother is there and she is talking to her mother, and so we get sort of backstory of Lucy's life. I thought it was fine. I thought it was perfectly fine. For me it wasn't doing anything special. I at least got to the end without wanting to DNF it, which is a positive because I was expecting to really struggle to get through it. But I got through it fine. But for me, it just wasn't doing anything special. I know lots of people really like Elizabeth Strout's writing. I think maybe she's just not my kind of author. This was longlisted for the Booker in 2016. And I know O. William, which is the third in the series, was shortlisted for the Booker last year. So yeah, it was fine, but I'm not going to continue with the series unless forced to do so for some reason. Then I read Into the Dark by Fiona Cummins, and this was a buddy read with Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. It was our first buddy read and it was an excellent book to read together. So this is a crime thriller, the kind of thing that Alice and I really love. This is the third book I've read by Fiona Cummins. It was Alice's first book by this author. And it has a really interesting premise. So we have a family, so a mother, father and a couple of kids who all of a sudden have disappeared. So the house has been left, the breakfast dishes are out, the phones are on charge, it's as if it's a normal day, but the people have disappeared. There's no one knows where they've gone. And on one of the mirrors in the house, written in blood, is the words, "Make them stop." It's a super pacey thriller. An awful lot goes on in here. There's lots of people hiding things and all kinds. It is almost ridiculous how much is going on in here, and Alice and I did comment on that, but it's that kind of thriller where that's just a lot of fun. There's just so much going on. It was really pacey, a real page turner. I really enjoyed it. I think this author has another book coming out later this year, which I will be looking out for as well. And then a book I finished yesterday is Are You Happy Now by Hanna Jameson. So this is an interesting book because this was almost a really great book for me, but it just wasn't quite. It has a really interesting premise. So it's about a pandemic which whereby people all of a sudden just like sit down on the floor wherever they are and refuse to move. They won't eat, they won't drink, they won't do anything. They just become like catatonic, I think is the word they use in the book. Unless if someone tries to actually like move them or help them, they will lash out and become really, really violent. And this, people just start doing this like all over the place, and you know, people don't know if it's some sort of like a viral thing or is it like a mass hysteria. No one really knows. But this book is actually very low on plot. So whilst this is going on in the background, and it is, you know, the characters are in some way connected to what's going on, it is really more about the characters in this book. So we have 4 main characters who, some of them sort of already know each other prior to the events of the book. Some of them only get to know each other via the events of the book. But it is really about those characters, about their relationships with each other. There is some queerness in here, which I thought was really interesting and I wasn't expecting. But yeah, it just kind of didn't work for me, and it could have been really great, but I wonder if it's just because it is very low on plot for what is, I think, a really interesting premise. Yeah, I think maybe I would have liked a bit more plot, a bit less character. So if you are sort of a reader who likes character-driven books, you know, this might be for you. I never wanted to DNF at any point. I was still interested enough in the characters to keep reading it, but it just didn't really do anything for me in the end. But I do think, is this a debut novel or has she written stuff before? No, she has written stuff before. Yeah, I mean, I would read more by the author, and I do think this was a really interesting idea, even though it just didn't quite work for me. Hello again. It's about a week later. It's Friday the 10th of March, and it's been an exciting week. So on Tuesday, last Tuesday, a lot of things happened. First of all, the Women's Prize long list was announced, which was very exciting. When the announcement was made, it was 6 o'clock in the evening, and I was at the gym. So I go to 2 gym classes on a Tuesday evening, and there's like a 2-minute gap at 6:15 between the 2 classes. And my original plan was to wait till I got home at about 7:30 before looking at the announcement video and seeing what books were on there. But I couldn't resist. So in that gap, I looked on my phone to see what books were on there. But it was a mistake because then I was totally distracted for the next hour of Zumba and kept getting the steps wrong because I was just thinking about what books I'd seen on the list, what books I might be able to get out from the library. But it's an interesting list, I think. A few books there that are no surprise, but a lot of books I have not heard of before. I have done a separate video talking about my thoughts on the long list, which you can check out if you're interested. The other exciting thing that happened on Tuesday was that the Eurovision tickets were released for sale. So Eurovision is being hosted in Liverpool this year, where I live, and everyone's been very excited, signed up to the mailing list, waiting to find out when the tickets were going to be released. Of course, we didn't manage to get tickets. No one I know has got tickets. I think I know like a friend of a friend who got tickets for one of the shows. That's it. We didn't even try to get tickets for the grand final. We tried to get tickets for one of the rehearsal shows. Didn't even manage to do that, which is a shame, but I guess it was a bit of a long shot. But I mean, I'm looking forward to watching the show from the comfort of my own home anyway. And then the other exciting thing that happened on Tuesday was that I handed my notice in at work. So it was a big day all round. I've got a new job which I'll be starting in a few weeks. So I'm very much looking forward to that. It's similar to what I do at the moment. I work in HR at the moment, so it's similar, but it's actually less responsibility, which is what I am looking for at the moment. So yes, a lot's been happening, but I have read another book. and that is If We Were Villains by L Rio. So this is dark academia, and I wasn't sure what I was going to think of this book going into it because I don't have the best track record with dark academia. Most notably, I didn't really like The Secret History by Donna Tartt, but I actually really enjoyed this. So this is set in Illinois, I think, and we're following a group of students who are in their 4th year, and they're all studying Shakespeare. And they can't have a conversation with anyone without throwing in multiple Shakespeare quotes, of course, which is obviously quite annoying. But that's what you expect from this kind of book, pretentious students. Right at the start of the book, we see one of the students when he's a little bit older called Oliver, and he is being released from prison. So he's been in prison for a number of years for an unspecified crime. And on his release, one of the detectives who investigated this crime at the time, who is now retired, wants to meet with Oliver to find out the truth about what really happened. So at this point, we don't know what crime was committed. We don't know if Oliver really did commit that crime or was he falsely imprisoned. What we do know is that we think Oliver's probably at least hiding something, and that all is not what it seems. The book is split into acts, and at the start of each act, we have like a few pages of Oliver and this detective sort of in the present day, but then most of the book is set in the past timeline where we are following this group of students, including Oliver, leading up to this incident, this crime, whatever it might be. I found the book really quite engaging and enjoyable, which is kind of surprising because on the face of it, I really don't like Shakespeare, and I kind of found myself glazing over a little bit at some of the Shakespeare sections, but I just found it quite a page turner, and just very enjoyable. My only quibble is that maybe when some of the revelations come towards the end of the book, some of them didn't quite ring true for me. So obviously as you read the book, you get to know the characters, and then when we find out some stuff, even though some stuff was hinted at, just some of it didn't ring true. I didn't quite believe some of it. But nevertheless, that's a minor quibble because I really enjoyed it. So maybe I do like dark academia after all. Again, it's probably about a week later. I can't remember when I last filmed an update, but I've read 2 more books this week. First is Authority by VanderMeer. So this is the second book in the Southern Reach trilogy. The first book, Annihilation, I read I think last month, and I really, really enjoyed it. Authority is quite different, and I wasn't overly keen on it, I must admit. So the Southern Reach trilogy is about Area X, where some sort of disaster's happened, something's taken place, and there are these missions of people being sent in to try and research the area and find out what has gone on there. So the first book, Annihilation, focuses on one of the missions going into Area X. Authority focuses back at the the government agency, the Southern Reach, who are arranging these missions and sending people into Area X. So the book follows mainly one of the men who works at the Southern Reach. He's known as Control in the book, and he is interviewing people who have returned from missions to try and find out what has happened there. And a lot of the book is, and it's interesting to a point, is sort of ponderings and debates as to what might be going on. I found that it dragged a little bit, to be honest. The reason I didn't DNF was because I do want to finish the trilogy, and I am really keen to read the third book. It picked up in sort of like the latter parts. We got a bit more action and it got a bit more interesting. And there's a great ending to this book. I love the ending. But yeah, sadly, I wasn't overly keen. I am looking forward to reading the third book, which is called Acceptance. My library has kindly agreed to purchase a copy because they didn't have one. So I am looking forward to reading that. There was one one line in this book which really disappointed me, and when I read it out to you, you will understand immediately why. This is not a spoiler. It occurs about halfway through the book. Yeah, and to put it into context, it's one of the people who working at the agency who is interviewing one of the people who've returned from one of the missions. And it says, he'd just become aware of her breasts, which hadn't happened during prior sessions, and now was trying to become unaware of them again. When I read that, I was like, why? What? Sorry? Why is that in here? Why has Jeff's editor not taken that ridiculous line out? So that did disappoint me, I must admit. Then I read The Drift by J Tudor. So this is a book that I was highly anticipating. I really like J Tudor. I've read all of their previous books. I'm giving them all 4 or 5 stars. And this I did enjoy, but I didn't like it as much as the previous books. And it is quite different to the previous books as well. It has a really interesting setup. So we have 3 groups of people in 3 sort of different isolated circumstances. So we have a group of friends in an isolated chalet in sort of like the wilderness in the middle of a snowstorm. We have a group of students on a coach. The coach has crashed and overturned, and the students are stuck inside this coach. And then we have a group of people stuck on a cable car between the mountains, and they don't know if anyone is going to come and save them. So, interesting setup. And the story is told from one of the characters from each of these 3 different scenarios. We learn early on that there is a virus which has been spreading throughout humans, so it's sort of pandemic-y. What can I say? It's not like too much of a pandemic novel, but that is an important part of the backdrop to the scenarios, if you like. It is sort of shelved as horror on Storygraph. And I don't think it's a horror. Like, I can see why it might be shelved there, but it is a thriller, and it is thrilling, and it is page-turning. But it wasn't remotely scary. So, I think if you go into this expecting horror, you'll probably be disappointed. One of the reasons I didn't get on with it was because there are a number of characters, because we are flipping between the 3 different scenarios, and I felt like I struggle with a lot of characters, and I felt like I couldn't keep track really of who was who, and I didn't have a distinct picture of the different characters. I couldn't really differentiate between them. There were points in the story where I was like, hang on, how is that happening? Because I was imagining they were, for example, in the cable car, and actually we were on the coach. So yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it, but I think it's just because I really love J Tudor's books that I was hoping to love it. So, and then I thought I'd show you 2 books that I'm currently reading at the moment. The first is Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This is a reread, and I'm reading this with Tiffany from Towering TBR. I'll link Tiffany's channel down below, and I am thoroughly enjoying this. We're about a quarter of the way through. Right from page 1, I was immediately immersed in this world. I don't know how Sarah Waters does it. I think she's an absolute genius. So full thoughts will follow once I finish the book. And next, I have started late last night, as in about midnight last night, I started one of the books on the Women's Prize long list. And I started with The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. And do you know what? I'm really, really enjoying this, and I'm so surprised. I was fully expecting to not like it and to DNF it. I think that's partly because I'm never really drawn to historical fiction about real people. I don't know why. And this is about Lucrezia di Medici, and I don't know, when I've heard other people talk about it, it's just not sounded that interesting to me, but I am loving it. Like, I am thoroughly enjoying it. I'm only about just over 100 pages in, so, you know, time will tell, but yeah, what is going on? Who am I? Very much enjoying this. Full thoughts to follow very soon. I've now finished reading The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell, and I really quite enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to like it at all. So, what's this about? There is a historical note at the start of the book which tells us that in 1560, 15-year-old Lucrezia di Cosimo de' Medici left Florence to begin her married life with Alfonso, Duke of Ferrara. Less than a year later, she would be dead. The official cause of her death was given as putrid fever, but it was rumoured that she had been murdered by her husband. This has a great opening chapter. So we see Lucrezia having dinner with her husband after she's been married for a little while, and she realises that she thinks he is going to try to kill her. So that's our opening chapter, and then what we have is some sort of flashback chapters to when Lucrezia was a younger child. We see her her upbringing, the sort of opulence of the place where she is raised, her sort of quite eccentric father who has a menagerie of animals in the basement of the place where they live, with a tiger and lions and different things. And so we get, it flashes between sort of when she was a younger child and when she is married to Alfonso. I don't know why, but I was expecting this to be a much denser read than it was. I've only read one Maggie O'Farrell before a long, long time ago. I've not read Hamnet. But it was a lot more sort of accessible and easy reading compared to what I was expecting. I found it quite compelling. I will say, for me, the first half was more compelling than the second half, and I suspect that's because in the first half we have more of the flashbacks to Lucrezia as a younger child, and some of the timeline of the second half of the book I personally just found a little bit confusing with where exactly we were. But overall, I enjoyed it. It was a decent read. And I also finished rereading Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. So this was a buddy read with Tiffany from Towering TBR, and this was a wonderful, wonderful reread. We took about a week and a half to read it in total, and it was a really nice way to do it. We just read sort of a couple of chapters a day. It's just so wonderful. So what's it about? It's set in Victorian London. My favourite three Sarah Waters books, Fingersmith, Affinity and Tipping the Velvet, are all set in the Victorian period. And in this one we follow Nan King, who as a young girl, when she's living with her family, she works, what's the word? She's like an oyster girl. Shell and oysters, is that what you do with oysters? I don't know. I'm veggie, I don't eat oysters. But anyway, and then she befriends someone called Kitty, who is a male impersonator, and their sort of friendship develops. Nan becomes sort of involved in the theatre as well, and it really follows Nan's it's a bit of a coming of age, I guess, Nan's experience in different sort of facets of London society, and in particular London queer spaces. Sarah Waters' writing is wonderful. This is Sarah Waters' debut novel. In this edition, this is a 20th anniversary edition, which was published in 2018, and there's an afterword by Sarah Waters, which I thought was really interesting. It talks about sort of what she sees as maybe some of the flaws of the book. I mean, that, you know, there's not many flaws in this book, I will say. But yeah, so it's interesting to then read about sort of how Sarah Waters sort of came up with the idea and put the story together. Yeah, I didn't want it to end. It was just a wonderful experience to reread this. I will say that I didn't remember that much of the story, and that is no reflection on the book. That's because I have a terrible memory. So the bit that I remembered was probably only sort of like the first section of this book, and there was a lot that I was like, oh yeah, I forgot this was going to happen. So the one plus of having a terrible memory is it does make rereading more interesting. So this was just an absolute delight. Some more Women's Prize reading. I read Cursed Bread by Sophie Mackintosh. So this is a book that I would have picked up regardless of it being on the Women's Prize long list, because I have read and loved Sophie Mackintosh's previous two books, The Water Cure, which was nominated for the Booker Prize a few years ago, and Blue Ticket. Both those books are sort of feminist dystopian novels, and Cursed Bread is quite different, and it's quite different in its writing style as well. The style of this book, to me, it's written in a weird way. It comes across as being a strange book because it's almost blurry. and it feels like when I was reading it, it felt like the meanings of what was happening was sort of like slipping through my fingers. I don't know how to describe it better than that. But that's something I really, really like. So it was definitely sort of like a strange reading experience for the most part. What's it about? It's about Elodie, who runs a bakery with her husband in a French village. And Elodie is fairly unsatisfied with her life in many ways. And then two newcomers arrive in the village, an ambassador and his wife called Violet. And Elodie starts to become somewhat obsessed with them. There is a level of intrigue in the book because we get occasional chapters which are told in the form of a letter or letters which Elodie is writing to Violet, and it's clear from those letters that Elodie's situation has changed. She's not in the bakery any longer. Something's obviously taken place and changed since sort of the main narrative story, but we don't exactly know what that is. There is a author's note at the end of the book which contains some historical information. Now, I didn't read that until coming to it at the end of the book. My advice to you would be to do the same, to not read it until the end, because I think it will influence your reading experience. That's not to say you'll necessarily have a worse reading experience going into it knowing the historical information, but it will definitely influence your reading experience. You will probably be expecting something different if you go into it knowing certain facts. I am looking forward to rereading this book now, knowing what I know, having come to the end of it, because I think that my rereading experience will be different again to my first reading experience. I thought this was brilliant. I wasn't sure to start with, I must admit, because it is really quite different, I think, to Sophie Mackintosh's previous two novels, and I was a bit unsure of sort of the writing style and what was going on, where we were going with it. But by the end of it, I really, really loved it. I thought that sort of the descriptions of desire in many ways were really, really well done. So yeah, I think Sophie Mackintosh, we can say, is a new favourite author. And then this morning I picked up and quickly discarded Pod by Laline Paull. This is also on the Women's Prize long list. It's a book I personally hadn't heard of before it was nominated. And it's about dolphins. So the main dolphin is called Ea. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's spelled E-A. And I think it's sort of a bit of a, not quite coming of age, but she sort of, finds her own way in life and stuff. I got to page 9 and DNF'd it. I picked it up this morning because the Women's Prize Plod Along group had a live show, and the hosts were all actually starting this book during the live show, so I thought I would join in with that. It's hosted by Gem of Books, Alison the Giant Bookshelf, and Charlie Brooks, whose channels I'll link down below. And yeah, I just really didn't like it. To be honest, I almost DNF'd at page 5, but thought I would, push on. I wasn't sure if it was going to be my kind of thing anyway, but I really didn't like the writing style, and I didn't like the descriptions. It just seemed a bit, I don't know how to say it, a bit bland and like simple. I don't know. Yeah, I just didn't like it. So that can be returned to the library. 2 more books to update on. First, let's talk about the DNF, which was another book from the Women's Prize long list. And this is Trespassess by Louise Kennedy. I read about 50 pages of this before DNFing. It's set in Ireland during the Troubles, and we follow a young woman who's a school teacher. And it's sort of about day-to-day life, really, living through the Troubles. I didn't get on with the writing style, and I found that I kept having to reread passages because it wasn't going into my brain. So in the end, I DNF'd it. And then a book which I have finished is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. So this is a fairly recently published thriller novel. So it's set in the US. I don't remember exactly where, at obviously a writing retreat. So this retreat is being run by this famous author who is quite eccentric, and she has invited about 5 sort of aspiring authors to this writing retreat. The main character is called Alex, and Alex has looked up to this author Rosa for most of her life. The retreat is taking place in Rosa's home, which is a big sort of mansion, in an isolated environment, and there is sort of snow and ice outside, so they are sort of not within easy reach of help should they require it, shall we say. This is a debut novel, and quite a lot happens. It's kind of ridiculous in many ways. I had a good time reading it. It's quite a page turner. It has some faults, and you know, if you're going to read it, you have to be prepared for it being a bit out there. But it was a decent read, so I wouldn't necessarily rush out to read anything else that this author writes. But if I like the premise of something else she comes out with, I'll certainly pick it up, because it kept me, you know, reasonably entertained. It's the end of the month now, so I have a few more books to talk about. I've had a little bit of a flurry of DNFing in the past couple of days, but I have finished another book which I really enjoyed. I'll save that one till last. So the first DNF was a NetGalley I had of The Birthday Girl by Sarah Ward, which is a crime novel being published in April in the UK. I've read Sarah Ward's previous crime novels in a series and enjoyed them. The Birthday Girl is a standalone. The reason I DNF'd this was because I read a few chapters and nothing was really gripping me. I didn't feel compelled to keep reading. There was nothing wrong with it, but it just wasn't grabbing me. Then, for different reasons, I DNF'd The Trees Grew Because I Bled There by LaRocca, which is a short story collection. This is my first time reading LaRocca. The reason I DNF'd this is because it's too disturbing for me. I only made it to the second story in the collection, and I DNF'd at that point. It seemed very good and very impactful, but it was just too disturbing for me. Then I DNF'd this one, Before You Knew My Name by Jacqueline Bublitz. This was recommended by someone in my book club. It's about a young woman who's murdered, and then another woman who finds her body, and the woman who's murdered is still sort of looking on at what's happening. Anyway, I only read a couple of chapters, it's just not for me. So the last book that I actually finished reading in March, which I really enjoyed, was Ghost Music by Anne Yu. Anne Yu is the author of Braised Pork, which I read a couple of years ago and really enjoyed. So in Ghost Music, we follow Song Yan, who is married, lives with her husband, doesn't have a terribly happy marriage. Song Yan wants to start a family. Her husband is reluctant to do so. And her husband's mother has recently started to live with them as well. It's quite there's a slightly strange undercurrent to the book. So the book opens in the first chapter with Song Yan thinking that there's a mushroom in the room talking to her, and mushrooms play a part throughout, as you can probably tell from the cover, throughout the novel. Song Yan discovers some things about her husband's past that she wasn't aware of. Music plays an important part in the novel as well, because Song Yan had dreams of being a pianist, and she gave all that up when she got married. They start to receive these mysterious parcels of mushrooms from, they don't know where from, but the note says it's from this guy who was a famous pianist who went missing many years ago and is presumed dead. So how on earth he could be sending these mushrooms is a mystery. It's really a story about a marriage and sort of domestic life, and but it has a sort of a strange undercurrent to it, and a bit of sort of surrealness as well. I'm not entirely sure I totally understood everything going on in here, but I really enjoyed it. I found it quite a hypnotic read as well. So yes, I do recommend this. So that's my March reading. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you've been reading. I hope you've been reading some good stuff. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.